Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me, as always, is Mike. Mike, our last video, we talked about our anticipation for the new Daredevil TV series, Daredevil Born Again. We had a lot of questions, we had a lot of worries, we had a lot of wonders, but we had a lot of hope because I think you and I are both amongst folks who believe that that is among the greatest. In my case, I believe it is the greatest adaptation of a comic book character ever put to screen. I don't know if you're the same way as me, I know, but you think it was fantastic. And so we have now seen two episodes. We've seen it come back, I think 7 year gap almost between the shows with the cancellations and contracts and all the craziness that happened. We finally got it. We got two episodes in. So we just thought we'd talk about it a little bit. We thought we'd break it down, go through what we thought as fans, kind of point out some things we saw and where that kind of adapts to some comic book storylines, and just our overall thoughts on the overall show. Um, I'll nerd out on this and be too critical because it's Daredevil, Batman, Wolverine. I'm going to pick anything with those three characters apart because I believe those are the three characters where Daredevil's the only one I know for sure. I have read every single issue of Daredevil. Wolverine, I think I've read all but like two or three, and Batman, there's probably like 100 I haven't because he's had like 2,000 issues. But we're going to talk a little bit about this, and we'll probably pick it apart and go through it. Overall, I'd say before I kick it to you, Mike, I did like it. I have some points, but I do like it. But I'll kick it to you first, sir. What were your thoughts on it? Long awaited. What did you think about the show?
Well, my opinion isn't going to weigh as heavy as yours because you're a super Daredevil fan. I've loved the character since I was a kid, and I loved the return of Daredevil. I thought it was really well done. I thought the acting was tremendous. I was so excited to see it again. But you and I both, when we did our previous video, we were kind of cautiously optimistic, and I was too. And then we heard about it got canned, and then they rewrote it,
Yep.
the original thing. So we were hoping, but still kind of like, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I would say it delivered on everything from a tertiary Daredevil fan. It was great fun to watch. Jackson and I both loved it. We had a lot of Jackson had questions, like I'm sure
Mhm.
you did, where I was the more, I'll just go with it. I mean,
Yeah.
D'Onofrio and Charlie Cox and everybody was just great. The acting, the cinematography was good. Remember when we talked before, the way a comic book fight scene is filmed, the bar was set really high. They will
Yep.
forever live up, kind of like the car chase scene in Bullet with
Yeah.
Steve McQueen. That's the gold standard, right?
Yep.
And I
Absolutely.
know they did try and replicate that to an extent. There were a few breakaways in the first fight sequence, but it was still really well done. Yeah, I was floored. I loved it.
Yeah, so overall, look, I am gonna, I'll pick this apart and nitpick, and so it may sound negative. I will say overall, I loved it, and I was a huge fan of both of the episodes that came out. So I'll go through the stuff that I thought was good, and then I'll go through my smaller nitpicks and just questions I would have. Um, Cox and D'Onofrio are fantastic. They just play the characters so well, and I think one of the interesting things is sometimes when actors are away from a role for a bit, when they come back, it almost seems like they're trying to act like themselves, acting like the character instead of the natural thing that was there. Right? I think one of the weirdest ones for me is like despite the fact that he's amazing in the role. Harrison Ford as Han Solo is different in the first two Star Wars movies as opposed to Return of the Jedi, where you can tell he's not really as into it. Sean Connery, despite being far and away the greatest James Bond, did the same thing when he returned after a movie absence with Diamonds Are Forever, where it's
Yeah.
like he's Sean Connery playing Sean Connery, not Sean Connery playing James Bond like it used to be. And what I have to give Cox and D'Onofrio, there's none of that. They are both fully invested. You can tell it mattered. You can tell they cared. The gap didn't really seem to distract them at all. It was almost like when Tom Cruise played Maverick. Granted, that was a lot longer layoff for Tom Cruise than these guys, but he
40
slipped right
years.
back into that role, and it was
Yeah.
like, holy cow, man, that works. And so I think both of them did a great job in that. I think, like you said, the fight scenes I will give those credits still. They were a little more comic booky than the TV show was originally. I think one of the things about the original Daredevil show is that was a very, very grounded, almost more like a movie like The Raid. kind of thing where it was more realistic fight scenes. This did have a little bit more comic book aesthetic, which I think could be two things. I think it could be a result of it being in the MCU, and I'm imagining at some point we'll see Daredevil in the larger MCU universe. And so maybe they want to add a little bit, because I don't think it was over the top, but maybe they do want to add a little bit to Daredevil, kind of like the way that the DCEU added a little bit to Batman, where
There
it
were
wasn't like the Dark Knight to make it a little more believable when he's in a Justice League fight.
there were some shots, Reed, that I turned to Jack and I was like, oh, that would be an amazing comic book panel.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you saw shots like that too. And so I agree with you. It felt like that in a way, but
Yeah, so does it live up to those original fight scenes like the hallway fight scene in season one, or that,
classic.
to me, the greatest fight scene I've ever seen, that Daredevil climbing down the stairs and wiping people out with the Punisher fight in season two? Not quite, but again, I think it's still very, very good and miles better than anything Disney Plus has
Miles
done.
better.
I
Yes.
would say it's the best MCU fight scenes I've seen probably since The Winter Soldier
Oh,
with Bucky and Cap. So I
yeah.
think overall those was really good. I do think the writing was pretty good overall. I think the dialogue and stuff, it didn't seem stilted or anything like that. And that's always the challenge with Daredevil, is part of why we loved that original series so much is it was, you and I always point this out about classic or comic book movies that we like to Hulk 2003 and stuff like that, that we love. It is those quiet moments. It's those moments of reflection. It's the small scenes. And Daredevil had so many of those on Netflix, with him just talking with that Father Lantom, the priest that he was friends with, and diving into things. The probably the best Daredevil Punisher scenes have nothing to do with them fighting each other. It's the one on the roof where they're debating the ethics of killing, and the one in the cemetery where Punisher's going through what happened to his family. And so those are the things that Daredevil did so well. And so I do feel like it's not quite to that level, but it's still very, very good, and you can tell they get the characters. So overall, I think there was a lot of good stuff. I think the other part I did like, there's some remixes on it, but I do appreciate there's some things that are comic book related with a little bit of surprises. So obviously, spoilers, and obviously we'll go through a little bit of spoilers on this. Foggy dies. We'll get into that, but Foggy dies. Daredevil throws Bullseye off the roof. That's right out of 181, where he kills Elektra, and then Daredevil does the same thing. The Affleck movie largely did the same thing, where he threw
Yeah.
Bullseye off the roof. So that's decently in comic character. Foggy's death's interesting because it did seem final. However, during Ed Brubaker's run, I think it's issue 82 of like the second volume of Daredevil. So I think you're probably looking at issue 300, 400. Foggy was apparently stabbed to death, and then they revealed it was fake, and he was actually put in a witness protection program. Because Matt at that time was in prison, and so the FBI had Foggy get fake shanked to put him in witness protection program, because everybody was coming after Matt because his identity as Daredevil had been leaked in the comics. So they could do something with that. The other stuff, like they had Karen move to San Francisco, that seemed to be a nod to Daredevil's had some time in San Francisco. So I think there's some cool stuff they did. Where I will say I can nitpick this, I don't necessarily know that I liked killing Foggy off early on. And what I think that is I think that is probably what is left of the fact that they filmed this series, about half of it, I believe, without Karen and Foggy. And then they brought them in because they needed to. And so I think what we are probably seeing the season one that was mainly filmed without these characters. And I'm imagining by season two, we will probably revert back to form, would be my guess. I think they
Oh,
probably had too much filmed with this Christian McDuffie character who's out of Mark Waid's run. And I believe the new detective's name is Cherry. And I think they probably had set up too much of that show to go full rewrite and shoot everything over. And so I think they probably inserted Karen and Foggy in at the beginning because they wanted to show them in there. I'm imagining we'll see them come back. Um, some things I didn't like. So I'll go through my flat out complaints.
here you
One,
go.
I think the narrative thing, and this is not out of comic books or anything. Narratively in the show, Brett Mahoney, the detective, for all three seasons of that show, there is an interesting dynamic with this one good detective that Daredevil and Foggy trust. He knows Foggy, he knows Daredevil, he works with them at different times. There's great scenes between the character. There's a part where he busts Punisher and Mahoney lets him go and lets Mahoney get the collar for arresting the Punisher. There's a fantastic end of season three where he sees the guy in the Daredevil costume, and then he sees Charlie Cox in the old beat down black one, and he goes, "No, that's the real Daredevil." And so there was a really cool relationship there. why we decided in this show to have a revelation that a cop was going to find out that Daredevil was Matt Murdock and have it be at the time that Foggy Nelson died and use a completely different cop instead of Brett Mahoney, I don't understand. That to me, that's not even a comic book thing. That is a weird narrative choice that I do not understand at all. Why we would have that role occupied by a brand new character when there's a completely serviceable character from the first series that most people liked available. That was a really weird choice. I think especially with the whole Mayor Fisk thing where he's like has a lot of push with the cops and stuff like that. Like you could see Mahoney leaving the police force because I just thought that was a really weird narrative choice. And so I'll nitpick that a bit. I think the other part, and you and I talked about this being inevitable with this show. Daredevil on Netflix to me is The Dark Knight. And what I mean by that is The Dark Knight Rises is only seen as a disappointment because of The Dark Knight. Now, there are legit criticisms of The Dark Knight Rises, but I do think if The Dark Knight had never been made and The
Oh
Dark
yeah,
Knight Rises was just a Batman movie that got released, people would have looked at that, and that's one of the greatest comic book films of all time. But
no doubt.
because it was a sequel to The Dark Knight, it doesn't live quite up to it. It always gets seen in the shadow of The Dark Knight. And I do think Daredevil Born Again was always going to have the problem of living in the shadow of the
I
original
agree.
Netflix series, in that all the things we're seeing, we have seen a bit before. When Matt and Fisk used to interact, right, the first season they're barely on screen with each other, and then the second season they have that great scene in the prison, and the third year is when you really see the huge conflict. It's still cool, it's still great, but it's if he hadn't tragically passed, it's like if they'd have brought Ledger back, it
Yeah,
would have been great. But does it have the same hit, the same kind of thing of like Ledger in that first film? Not as much.
right.
Um, Daredevil retiring from being Daredevil again. We saw this. This was done in the Defenders, and it was done a little bit. And so again, it does get a little bit like how many times is Matt going to quit, right? And I guess that's happened in comics, but it does like we're fourth season in. This is like the second or third time we've gone through a Matt's no longer Daredevil arc. And again, I get why they're doing it, but there is a bit of why. I think same thing with Bullseye killing another beloved character. It's very much like the comic books. When Bullseye kills Elektra, that's shocking and it makes you hate Bullseye. When he kills Karen Page like 20 years later, it's still shocking, but does it hold the same level of shock as when he puts the Psy into Elektra? Not as much. And so I do think, for me at least, Mike, that was kind of something that was on my mind while I was watching it. Is this is good, and if this was the first ever Daredevil series, I would be sitting on here raving incredible
Yeah.
because it's in the shadow of that net. Do you think that's something that's going to hurt this, that it's in the shadow of that Netflix show that everyone holds in such high regard?
There is that sophomoric, what they call, like when a band puts out a great album, the second album is always like, well, it's under a lot of scrutiny. They can put out a masterpiece and it just doesn't have the same impact as the original Wham. When we got the 3 seasons of Daredevil, when did it come out?
I think that's
2015?
2015, 2016, and like maybe 20. I think it wrapped up in 2019, I believe.
Oh, you're right. It was on hold for a little bit. Um,
Well, because they did that whole Defenders series in the
yeah.
middle, and Netflix never produces everything like in a year.
So anyway, what I'll say about that, for the tertiary fan like me, it's been a while. It's been 5 years.
Mhm.
And although we still hold that up there, I don't remember all the little details that a true Daredevil fan would. And I wouldn't know all the Easter eggs. So I'm just watching it. I'll be honest, I have not seen an episode of Daredevil in probably 5 years. So I haven't watched that since then. And so it was really fun to see it in that little tinge of a nostalgia for the general audience of like, oh yeah, I remember how cool Daredevil was. We kind of pick up where we left off and we're like, we're going to roll with it. I was like, why are we killing Foggy in the first episode? That's sad. And then some of the other things that a tertiary fan would know is, you know, it looks like Kingpin's lost a little
Yeah,
stupid
so
little things like that. And, and then
he was
Daredevil called him
definitely
up.
less bulky.
Yeah. And he was like, you are lighter of foot than I remember, Daredevil said. I love the way they did the Daredevil hearing thing. I thought
Mhm.
it was new, it was different, it was kind of cool. Um, I loved that Karen and Foggy were in it. I was sad that Foggy died. I feel like you said when they turn the script a little bit and why they might not have used the other detective is you don't always get the actors that you want when you want them.
And it could be an
It
availability
was
thing.
probably something like that. And they were like, well, we could hire another guy to be that actor, but then you get
And
knocked
it's
for
not the
that.
same. Yeah.
And it's not the same. And you can nitpick these things to death,
Oh
but
yeah. No, and
as
I
a comic book fan, I can just say I was really happy to see Daredevil on the screen again. I was not disappointed, although I was kind of like, I was worried, but I
yep.
thought it was really well done. And for the average fan, I think we're all going to love it. We're going to fall in love with Daredevil again. And if we go back and watch the first season, we could probably get pretty particular. But for right
Oh, yeah.
now,
Everything in hindsight, and I
yeah.
and I think there's two major complaints I would have overall that I think the show will have trouble fixing. And so the biggest thing is season three, and this was always going to be hard when they brought him back. Brought such a beautiful conclusion to the story as far as that Agent Nadeem dying basically to make sure Kingpin goes away. And because I don't think the MCU ever intended for Fisk to be the same Wilson Fisk from the Netflix show when they put him in Hawkeye and when they put him in Echo and those other shows. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to marry the MCU Kingpin with the Netflix one and make it that it's the same. And if you're just a Daredevil fan who's watched the show, it's kind of like, wait a second, what happened to that whole you're going to jail the rest of your life thing? That Matt, basically had leverage on him. Like, why did Matt never use that? And they don't explain that. They did make a little reference to him getting shot in the face by Echo and stuff like that. And so that's a bit like Lego pieces that don't go together, where I think if you're probably just watching at home, it's probably like, oh, okay, yeah. If you're more of a fan of the shows in particular, I think you're gonna be like, what the heck, man? How did Fisk just get out of jail? Right?
I will tell you, Jackson and I talked about that for about 30 minutes.
Yeah, and
And,
that
and
that fundamentally bugged me. I think the other part, um, they are pulling from, I think, some of the lesser Daredevil material. Um, here's my issue with some of the Daredevil stuff. This is the MCU period. The MCU is obsessed with pulling from stuff the last 4 or 5 years, and like Kristen McDuffie's out of the Mark Waid era. She's a good character, but she was Matt's kind of adversary and then love interest. Choosing to make her like a Foggy replacement is a really weird usage of the character because they had a pretty complex and intricate relationship in the comic books. And so to have her be like she was flirting with Foggy and then it was a little bit like when the Flash chose to have Linda date Barry. Like,
right.
why? That's a weird choice, right? And again, Heather Glenn is a love interest from the Frank Miller era, but it's like, why would you use Kristen that way? It's very weird. And I liked Mark Waid's run. They're pulling a little bit from Charles Soule's run with Muse. I don't that Charles Soule's run's okay, but like, is that something I immediately like, oh, we gotta put this out? I don't know. The White Tiger storyline will be interesting. That was a great run by Brian Michael Bendis, that trial and what happened. It's different circumstances, but I do think it'll be interesting. I think the biggest problem they're going to have with this show, um, people are going to be overly critical. And I do think my brother and I were talking about this, and this will hit some fans who know these shows and some not. In the 80s, there was a sitcom called Cheers. Cheers had a recurring character of Frasier Crane on that
Got its
show.
own show.
Frasier was so popular that it spun off into its own show. Now, if you watched Cheers and then you watched Frasier, while it's the same character, he has the same occupation. He's in a different city. There's details that are different, a different recurring cast, and he acts a lot different. I feel like this Daredevil Born Again is that to Netflix. I feel like it's Frasier to Cheers because you have Matt's no longer in Hell's Kitchen. The dynamic that made the show for so many was Matt, Karen, Foggy. Those three actors, their chemistry, the way they worked together. Those are all removed now. The circumstances around Fisk's marriage, him and Vanessa, how they were with each other. Now there's strife. And again, that's comic book accurate, but in the show, those two were like crazy lockstep with each other. Now all of a sudden, it's not. And so I do think there is a little bit of it's more of a spin-off than it is Daredevil season 4 than I think. And so I look, I liked it. It probably sounds like I'm complaining to complain. I would still give this an A. It was two of the best hours of television I've seen in years. I think it's the best thing the MCU's put out probably since maybe Spider-Man No Way Home, right? I
Yeah.
think that's the last. So I mean, we're talking a good 4 years. I'm excited for it. I just there's a little missing tethers and things that I'm like bugs me. It's a little annoying thing that you're just like, why? Why is that not there?
There
And I
are.
think they could have. To
You know
me,
what?
what's interesting, this is what I was thinking the whole time with this. I don't know why they didn't use the snap. Because here's the thing:
Oh
if you
no.
want to know why if you really wanted to MCU this, if you want to explain why is Karen someplace else, how did Fisk get out of jail? If you want to wash all that away, as soon as Foggy gets shot and he throws Bullseye off the roof, just have the snap happen and
Yeah.
everybody starts disappearing. And you could have Matt goes away for 5 years and the snap comes back. And when he comes back, Fisk has helped rebuild New York. That's how he's out of jail.
Mhm.
That's why he's this beloved figure now. You could have Karen is in San Francisco now because that happened during the blip. And I
Yeah.
think that could have been an in-universe way to explain all these changes that have happened
Yeah.
and would have felt kind of like you do as the audience of like, man, everything's really different. It would have put Matt in a way that could have worked that way, especially, and it would have firmly put this in the MCU. I just those were the writing things that I was like, it would have been interesting to see them do. That said, Matt, if or Mark, Mike, I stopped calling you Matt. Mike, if you had to
Matt
give this a
Murdock.
grade, you're a teacher, report card. What's your grade on the first couple episodes so far?
Oh, I give it an A, and
Eh.
I really, really would. And I just think, it's great TV. Like you said, you hadn't had that much fun watching
Oh yeah.
TV in a long time. And he's not even my favorite character. I like him, but man, it was great. And you're right. I think Disney, in the end, I think Disney, rightfully so, listened to some advice from some people who told them, cinematographers, actors, all the people that went into making the first show, and talked about how well it was done, and it made them rethink it. And I like that they took the extra time to beef it up from whatever it was, wherever it's going. Now, maybe it'll still go there eventually because the downward slide that shows usually do,
Yep.
but at least they had the reverence and the respect to go all in on this, and I think they did. And personally, I don't like the snap. I'm not a fan of the snap,
Oh
and I
yeah, I
do
got you.
enjoy the fact that there are sub shows who did not snap.
No, I got you. Yeah, if I had to give it a final grade, I would say an A as well. I think the hard part with this show, I've never had a week where I've had to wait for an episode of Daredevil because
Oh
Netflix
no,
dropped them
yeah,
all at the same time.
that
And so
you would have
that will
gotten no
be,
sleep last night, my friend. You would have been.
oh no, yeah, I'd have binged all 13. I'd
Yeah, yeah.
have developed a cold and had to be out of work today. Um,
Daredevil cold.
And so I think the thing is, no, I mean, I remember when those came out, I literally reserved PTO time at work typically to make sure I could binge it. So I think that is the one thing that will be interesting is this is going to open itself up to a little bit more scrutiny because we've never, the coolest thing Netflix did is if there was an episode that left some tethers you wanted answers to, you didn't let them sit for a week. You just click next episode or Netflix does that thing where it just runs it for you. And so
Yeah,
I think that'll be interesting with this show is I've never had where Daredevil I've had to wait. I think the other part, Netflix's episodes were all about an hour long. These were, I think, 50 minutes and then one was 40. So
yeah,
we're getting four less episodes than a Netflix series. And I think about 10 to 12 minutes less per episode. So we're really losing on a season at least 4 hours, probably closer to five because of the shortened episodes. And so I think that'll be interesting too. But I'm just so glad it's back. I mean, look, as much as I could sit here and pick it apart, that was
Mhm.
so much fun to see the character,
It's
see the
pretty
suit.
cool, right? It was
I
pretty
will
cool.
say, if I do have one complaint that I'm just like Disney changing, go back to the original intro.
Yeah,
The new intro's not bad, but why are we changing the intro? That original intro, maybe they can't use it contractually because of Netflix.
right,
Maybe
right.
that's what it was. But overall, ton of fun. We're very excited for this. We'll keep doing episode breakdowns and things like that. But we're always interested. What did you guys think? What did you think of the episodes? What did you think below? Let us know, folks. Did this live up to your expectations? If you were a huge fan of the Netflix, or if you're someone who kind of just checked this out on its own with no frame of reference, what did you think? As always, folks, thank you guys so much for watching. God bless you, and we'll catch you in our next episode.
Thanks, everybody.